on bended knee in prayer for the people whose lives were lost here, for the workers who work here, for the families who mourn. This nation stands with the good people of New York City and New Jersey and Connecticut as we mourn the loss of thousands of our citizens. I can hear you. I can hear you. The rest of the world hears you. And the people who knocked these buildings down will hear all of us soon.
Iconic remarks from President George W. Bush amidst the rubble at the scene of the attack at the World Trade Center's 9/11. That speech actually given 3 days after the attack that killed thousands and injured so many more. We know many of the terrorists involved in that attack were here on expired visas. So with all this attention, and dare I say, the dominant media culture actually cheering on bringing in so many more so-called refugees, are we setting ourselves up for the next 9/11? For more on this, we're pleased to be rejoined by former INS agent Michael Cutler. As we have mentioned time and again, Michael testified before the 9/11 Commission. He also spoke before the Border Security Caucus in the United States House, of which I was a member. He Skypes in today from New York City. And again, Michael, we do have that question. Are we being set up for another 9/11 or something worse?
Absolutely. I've come to think of it as weaponized compassion. You know, the terrorists and their supporters know that we have a soft spot. The American people are the most compassionate, the most considerate, the most willing to jump in and help anybody in trouble. And so I call this weaponized compassion. And you know, I've been before, I think we're up to 16 congressional hearings in the House and Senate, and there have been other hearings. And I did a bit of research, and you're going to be surprised to find this out. But on February 24th, 1998, 2 days shy of the 5th anniversary of the first bombing at the World Trade Center, the Senate Judiciary Committee, a subcommittee on intelligence and counterterrorism, held a hearing on the bombing of the Trade Center. And Dianne Feinstein, of all people, said that we ought to rethink this notion of providing visas to citizens of countries that sponsor terrorism. Yet when Donald Trump said it, he was accused of being crazy, radical, extreme. Not one voice was raised against Dianne Feinstein for challenging the visa waiver program, which is something that I think should have ended the morning after 9/11. And she talked about no longer providing visas or providing education to people who come from those same countries to teach them how to be nuclear physicists and biochemists and provide them with the training to carry out.
And the point you make is a valid one, and we're going to hear from Mr. Trump on the ground last month in Arizona in just a minute. But right now, let's go to America's heartland, proud home of Iowa State University. That would be Ames, Iowa, where Chad is on the phone at 1-877 Newsmax. Chad, welcome to America Talks Live.
Thank you. I just wanted to comment on the last segment. Mr. Morse is absolutely correct on what he says about Uma Abedin, and your speaker right now is also correct, and I think we're going to have worse than 9/11.
Well, I believe the warnings have been there, and that is, of course, why we do this program, Chad. It is to hear from you and to hear from people who quite candidly get short shrift from the dominant media culture where this open borders madness seems to envelop all of the hoi polloi. We say this not out of xenophobia, not out of some sort of ethnic bias, but because border security is national security. And sadly, Michael Cutler, that lesson has not been learned by administrations, Republican and Democrat, in the decade and a half since this 9/11 attack.
You're right. And by the way, there's something else about Hillary with her emails. Imagine if there is no September or October surprise and she gets blackmailed. If you don't do what we want, you know, and she could hear from a leader of a country, whether it's Russia, whether it's Iran, whether it's China, if you don't do what we tell you, we will make public the emails that you thought you got rid of. I mean, she put herself into one hell of a bind. And I have to tell you, as an agent, I had a security clearance. I had a top secret clearance, not anywhere near as lofty as hers. But if I treated material the way she did, I would have been out of a job and certainly could never have gotten a security clearance. And yet, if she's elected president, she will have the highest of all security clearances, even after all that we know about her mishandling of national security information.
Well, let us turn to her opponent for the White House and the aforementioned remarks of Donald Trump in the state I used to represent in Congress, Arizona, last month, outlining his immigration plan. Let's listen, and then we'll get your reaction.
New screening tests for all applicants that include, and this is so important, especially if you get the right people, and we will get the right people, an ideological certification to make sure that those we are admitting to our country share our values and love our people.
I got to tell you, Michael, I'm almost of two minds on this, because can't people simply lie on a test? Or do you believe what he was offering was shorthand for intense psychological scrutiny of those who are trying to get here?
Well, and so this is why interior enforcement is so important. And that's what we never hear about. Everyone keeps talking about a wall on the border, and I compare a wall on the border with a wing on an airplane. You know, without a wing, an airplane doesn't fly, but the wing by itself goes nowhere. Once aliens get into the country, whether it's through ports of entry, as the terrorists did, or by running their borders, northern, southern borders, stowing away on ships, and we need to worry about terror training camps in Latin America, by the way, in the tri-border region of Brazil, then they're home free. So what we need to do is to go after those people who not only overstay, but who commit fraud, who make statements on applications for visas, or people that might make statements about their ideological orientation that ultimately turn out to be false. They need to be arrested, potentially prosecuted, certainly removed from the United States. But this requires a vibrant and effective interior enforcement program, and that's something that Trump did talk about. And yet Hillary's solution to illegal immigration is to give everybody lawful status. And I got to make one quick point. Even the Republicans are saying, well, we can't deport 11 million. It's the most ridiculous argument. First of all, we probably have 30 or 40 million, but the cops don't catch every speeder. They don't get every drunk driver or everybody who texts. And the IRS doesn't get everybody who commits tax fraud. You get enough people and you prosecute them aggressively. You publicize what you're doing, and you send a clear message that if you are detected and if you are caught, the world will alter materially for you. I call that deterrence through enforcement. You don't need to deport every illegal alien. You have to convince people, however, that we're certainly not going to allow you to stay here if you violate our laws. And that's what's missing from that whole conversation. And
that is the point that we have made time and again, Michael. And a point we'd like you to react to if you're watching us at 1-877-NEWSMAX, 1-877-639-7629. When you enforce the law, guess what happens? People obey the law. But if you don't enforce the laws on the books, you get the situation we have now. Listen, I want to take another listen to more of what Mr. Trump had to say, especially since the dominant media culture was so certain this was going to hurt his poll numbers, and in fact, they have gone up. Here again, Donald Trump talking about visas and how they need to be restricted.
We are going to suspend the issuance of visas to any place where adequate screening cannot occur. Countries from which immigration will be suspended would include places like Syria and Libya.
And the fact is, talk about existing law. For the know-nothings who claim that somehow there is a violation of the Constitution, we have in place existing law that allows the President of the United States specifically to shut off immigration from countries. And indeed, correct me if I'm not wrong on this, Michael, Jimmy Carter, in the wake of the seizing of the hostages in Tehran, did the same thing with Iran. About 30 seconds for the final word.
Absolutely, he did. I was actually going to make that point. And then we hear this nonsense about the Latino voter, which is a disgusting form of profiling and bigotry. It's got to end. We've got to put Americans first. Donald Trump has been articulating it clearly. And by the way, if I could put a quick plug in, I've written about these issues for capsweb.org, Californians Population Stabilization, and Front Page Magazine. and The Social Contract, 3 publications, because I'm trying to wake up as many of our fellow Americans so that we don't, God forbid, live through another nightmare like 9/11. We need to learn the lessons that history has taught us time and again, and we need leaders in position in Washington and on the local level who put America and Americans first in their list of priorities.
Michael Cutler, today via Skype from New York City, reflecting on 9/11 and doing his best to sound the alarm to prevent another one. We thank you so much, sir.
Thanks
When
for
we
having me.
return, when we come back, thank you. When we come back, the former governor of New York, George Pataki, with his reflections of what transpired that fateful day. You're watching America Talks Live.